Hi everyone, this activity is going to show you a few skills that you'll need to know for making a game in the future. So let me just show you what it's going to look like. It's just going to be a simple program that has some ball sprites bouncing around the screen. You'll notice they bounce around on their own once you start. They bounce off the edges. And then I also have a collision counter just to count how many times they run into each other. Notice that when they run into each other, they also bounce off of each other. That's pretty much all there is to it. So I'm just going to walk you through how to get set up. So one thing I'm going to need to do is I have my Scratch starter screen, my basic cat sprite. I'm going to just change the cat's costume. I can go to the costumes tab and click choose a costume. And I'll just change it to the blue ball sprite. I want it to be a little bit bigger just to increase the chances of them hitting each other. So I've got that one, and then I'm just going to duplicate it. And in fact, I'm not even going to do that yet. Let me delete the old one. Because you can duplicate sprites, and since both of these are going to be really similar to each other, I can pretty much just build the first one and then duplicate it. So what do I want this thing to do? I just want it to bounce around on its own. That's kind of it. So I'm just going to have the green flag be my starter, and when the program starts, I just want the ball to move forever. So I'm getting a forever block. And I just want it to move, so I'll just tell it to move 10 steps. And there's this if on edge bounce, so it's going to bounce off the edges. So you already that's all it takes to have a ball that bounces and moves on its own. However, it's kind of boring because it always every time you start it, it always just goes the way it was pointing and goes straight. Not much is going to change. So what I'm going to do is have it start off in a random direction. So I'll put this at the beginning, point in direction, and then I'll pick a random direction. So you can see from the direction picker, it goes from 0 to positive 180, and from 0 to negative 180 in the negative numbers. However, there actually is, it really just goes from, like, it is just 360 degrees, like a full circle. And if you use a number bigger than 180, so if I just type in 270, for example, that translates to negative 90 because it's just 90 more than 180. So you really can just use all of the numbers from 1 to 360. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to say 1 to 360. And so if it ends up picking a number that's bigger than 180, it'll translate to one of those negative numbers. So like if it ends up picking 355, that's just negative 5. And that works out fine. So now the ball will point in a random direction. So you'll notice it's bouncing off the corners. If I restart, starts in a different direction, starts in a different direction again. So it's randomized. That'll be at least a little bit more interesting. And now, what else do I need it to do? Well, at this point, I kind of just want to see how it interacts with the other ball. So I'm going to duplicate it. And also just going to change the color of one of them so I can tell the difference. In costumes, I will just choose costume and choose the green ball. So one's blue and one's green. Otherwise, they're the same. But one thing I wanted them to do was be able to bounce off each other, not just the edges. Right now they can't bounce off of each other. If they run into each other, they actually just go straight through. See how they just passed each other? So what I'm going to do is add an if. If touching sprite 1, because this is sprite 2, this is the green ball. If touching sprite 1, what I want it to do is just turn around in the other direction and leave. Just turn around and bounce off. So I'll say turn 180 degrees. And then I'll have it move 10 steps so that it gets away from the other block. Actually, I'll leave this out for a minute. I'm going to leave the move 10 steps out just so you can see what happens. It usually causes a glitch. Maybe it won't, but it usually does. Let me also just copy that same thing over to my other sprite. If touching the other sprite, so sprite 2, same thing. Turn 180 degrees. See what happens. It might glitch, it might not. Let me run it. Of course they're not glitching. Well, I guess it's fine. What can happen, you kind of saw it there a little bit, that they'll hit each other more than once. They kind of stick together a little bit, and that might happen. You might experience this happening in your program much more than this example. It's kind of unpredictable. Scratch, it just happens in Scratch. Sometimes this if touching another sprite thing it just doesn't work out the way you would expect it to. And I think it's like, even after it turns, it still kind of senses that it's touching it, and it tries to turn again. And then it's pointing in the direction it was going in the first place, so it tries to turn again. And it can do that. It can glitch like that, kind of turning 180 degrees repeatedly a whole bunch of times. But it's not doing that really bad right now. If you are having that problem, if your sprites are sticking together and glitching, there is a solution. At least this should work. What you can add is just try doing like a move 10 steps, or maybe even farther. Have maybe move 15 steps or something like that after it turns. That should get far enough away that there's no more sort of extra collisions and glitching. Let's see if that did anything. I was getting periodic glitches before. It might not always work, but it's alright. I'm not even getting those little glitches anymore. So I think it is helping, and it'll work even better if both sprites have that. And it should keep them away from each other enough that they don't stick together. So at this point, it's already kind of doing what I wanted it to do. You saw in my example though, I also had a collision counter. And so that is something I'm going to leave up to you. You'll need to use a variable. You'll need to use an if statement. So see if you can figure out how to add a collision counter that counts how many times the sprites run into each other, and try to add that to your program. And that is all for this activity.